Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 210, On the Boat, 1. Most of the able-bodied men at the estate were retired soldiers from the Naval Heavenly Defense Unit. They moved in unison, placing wooden pillars that would serve as rollers and moving the boat that had been anchored not far from the estate. What was surprising here was that these dozen or so soldiers were possessed by resentful spirits. Someone clicked their tongue while looking at them. In all my life, this is the first time I've seen something like this. It was the monk Imanhei. The original reason he had come here was to save Wu In-yom, the owner of the estate. However, with his skills that were merely at the profound level diviner, the lowest among the 4 arts of the Sun and Moon Monastery, he couldn't suppress a high-ranking resentful spirit of the blue spirit level, and instead he was even possessed by one of the resentful spirits. But now, the resentful spirit had left his body, and through the exiled monk Jiajiamzhong, Imanhei heard about what had happened so far. The outcome is truly bitter. Indeed. How could I have known? It's all karma. With those words, the exiled monk Jiajiamzhong gulped down the liquor contained in the gourd bottle. At first he had thought that the resentful spirits were the root of the problem. But now that he knew the actual cause, he couldn't possibly defend the Wu family and their servants. The liquor tastes bitter today. You always said it was sweet, but now it suddenly tastes bitter? Look here, Munhei. Oh, Master Monk. Do you know what this drunkard has been realizing these days? What is it? In the end, there is no true right or wrong in living. Right or wrong? That's right. You're correct. Isn't that how all worldly matters are? When I was in the mountain temple, I thought that only what was written in the scriptures was the absolute truth and that all people were in the process of realizing truth, goodness, and beauty. He really believed so. However, Jiajiamzhong, who had been excommunicated and entered the world, saw and experienced many things and realized that it wasn't the case. The world was more complex than he thought and had many emotional factors. Isn't it the same now? It wasn't the living that were pitiable, but there was a heartbreaking story behind the dead. Truth, goodness, and beauty, my ass. The world was no different from rough waves. Everyone was just swept away by those waves. Look at the world and experience it directly. Listening through someone else's ears and reading books is no different from covering your eyes and plugging your ears. Your words are correct, master. The words of the one he could no longer call his master came to mind. Jiajiamzhong, who had been shaking his head, took another swig of liquor and asked, "By the way, are you all right?" "I'm fine. But tell me, was I really that badly injured?" Jiajiamzhong stared intently at Imanhei, who asked back. His body was truly fine. Originally, the bone of his elbow had protruded and even his shin bone was broken. But before that long-time courtesan-like fellow made the possessing resentful spirit come out, he told it to heal the body and the injured parts were really healed. That bastard must have been rough knowing this. Otherwise, there was no way he would have been so brutal while claiming to save the possessed person. Well, whatever the case, as long as Imanhei wasn't harmed, he had no intention of blaming him. Imanhei said to Jiajiamzhong, who was clicking his tongue, "But will you be all right?" "What do you mean?" "You said you would do anything that fellow asks of you because of me, right? Don't worry about it." "How can I not worry? If you get in trouble because of me..." "Enough. I'm just repaying what I've received so far." "What have you received from me?" At those words, Jiajiamzhong smiled, revealing his yellow teeth with a fierce expression. "I've received a lot. Yes. I've received a lot indeed." Jiajiamzhong was always grateful to Imanhei. If it weren't for him, he might have really gone insane by now. He believed that the reason he could still function as a human being was all because Imanhei acknowledged these cursed eyes of his. "Oh, you're making me embarrassed for nothing." "Pat pat." Jiajiamzhong patted his shoulder and said, "That's what I meant to say. Anyway, don't worry. Do you think this drunkard can't take care of himself? You treat yourself too roughly, that's why. I told you not to worry." Anyway, I should go and pay off my debt to that long-time courtesan-like fellow." With those words, Jiajiamzhong crossed his arms and walked towards Mok Jiangun, who was standing on the hill. As he approached from behind, Mok Jiangun opened his mouth as if he had been waiting. "Your close friend is all right, I presume?" "Yeah. As you said, he's perfectly fine. He must have consumed some energy to recover, but he should be fine. Then will you settle the agreed-upon price?" "Of course. I'll definitely do that. Tell me what you want. Now that he had confirmed that the monk Iman Hay, whom he considered his only friend, was fine, he was determined to keep the prior agreement no matter what. Then Mok Jung-un turned his head and said, "Then let me receive the formula of the unsurpassed power." What? As soon as those words ended, Ja Jiamjong's expression hardened. He had been worried about what Mok Jung-un would demand. But he never expected the words unsurpassed power to come out of Mok Jung-un's mouth of all things. Didn't you say you would do anything as long as I don't ask for your life? Ja Jiamjong was at a loss for words at Mok Jung-un's remark. Of course he had said that. But how could he have known that a request that was considered taboo in the martial arts world would come from the mouth of an expert who could use advanced techniques like void grasping? The bewildered Ja Jiamjong finally opened his mouth. "The unsurpassed power belongs to Shaolin. But you learned it. I am an exiled monk. You should know well what that means." "Yes. That's why I'm asking you to teach me the unsurpassed power." "Ha. You're not going to break the agreement, are you?" "I'm not saying I'll break it. It's just that it's difficult." Ja Jiamjong sighed. Mok Jung-un tilted his head and asked, "What's difficult?" "Two things are difficult." "Two things?" "Yes." "What are they?" "First, even if I'm an exiled monk as a former disciple of Shaolin, I can't release Shaolin's secrets to the outside. That would be the case for most sects, not just Shaolin." At his words, Mok Jung-un chuckled. Then he asked, "Since you say that, I want to ask something I was curious about." "What is it?" "Being an exiled monk means you were excommunicated from that sect, so why did they leave your martial arts intact?" There was a circumstance he couldn't reveal. It was also related to his master, Sutra Pavilion Master Gongjon. Originally, as Mok Jung-un said, Shaolin also cuts off the energy meridians or destroys the danjian of a monk who is excommunicated. However, Grand Monk Gongjon had secretly sent him out of Shaolin 5 days before the originally scheduled excommunication ceremony. As he sent him out, Grand Monk Gongjon strongly advised him, "If someone asks about the breathing technique you learned, tell them it's the unsurpassed power." "What? This is just..." "Yes. It's a coincidence I realized while looking at the traces on the wall during Bodhidharma's wall-facing meditation. But tell them it's the unsurpassed power." "Why is that?" "So that you can preserve your body intact. If you say that you, Diakmun no Jiamjong, have mastered the unsurpassed power that hasn't even been restored yet, Shaolin won't be able to touch you easily. No, this poor monk will make it so." "Master." Ja Jiamjong had no great attachment to martial arts. He was going to be excommunicated anyway, so what difference would it make if he lost it? However, he couldn't help but be moved by his master's consideration. "Don't be too distressed about having those eyes. There is a reason for everything. So live firmly and freely as much as you suffer." That was the last conversation he had with his master, Grand Monk Gongjon. Since then, whenever someone questioned his martial arts as the unsurpassed power while Ja Jiamjong roamed the martial arts world, he neither denied nor affirmed it. It was because he wanted to keep his master's request while not telling a lie that would disgrace the sect. "I thought it would be enough even if I didn't explicitly say it." He never thought that someone unrelated to Shaolin would demand the unsurpassed power like this. In fact, who would dare to covet the martial arts of Shaolin, which could be called the heart of the Central Plains? It was a truly bold request. Then Mok Jung-un said, "Seeing that you're not answering, is the rumor true?" "Rumor?" "Yes. I heard that Shaolin can't touch you because they haven't been able to restore the unsurpassed power." Ja Jiamjong didn't answer anything to this. It was half true and half false, but he couldn't reveal it for the sake of his promise with his master. "You're not denying it. Then what's the second difficulty?" That is. There is no such thing as a formula for the unsurpassed power." "What?" At these words, Mok Jung-un frowned. Does it make sense to say that he doesn't know the formula of the cultivation method he learned? However, this was the truth. I realized this by looking at the traces on the cliff of the wall-facing hall in the Bodhidharma cave. But no one except me could see those traces. It was a truly strange occurrence. Even his master, Sutra Pavilion Master Gongjon, was the same. To share this realization with Grand Monk Gongjon, he showed him the cliff of the wall-facing hall, but even he couldn't see the traces. "Can you really see the traces?" "It's true." "Oh, Amit Ba. It's a truly mysterious thing. Because of that, Jajimjong could know. The fact that only he could see these traces. Although I can't reveal the fact that it's not the unsurpassed power, if he finds out there's no formula, he won't be able to make this request anymore. It didn't matter even if he didn't believe it. Because he definitely wasn't lying. As expected, Mok Jung-un looked at him with suspicious eyes. Jajimjong didn't avoid his gaze. After staring for a while, Mok Jung-un finally said, "How did you learn it if there's no formula?" "I don't know. I also suddenly realized it after seeing the traces left on the wall." "You suddenly realized it?" "Yes." Even if you can't believe it, I can't help it. This is the truth, I swear to the heavens." At his vow, Mok Jung-un clicked his tongue softly. In fact, Mok Jung-un didn't believe in such words of swearing to the heavens. However, looking at Jajimjong's confident attitude of not avoiding his gaze at all, it seemed like it wasn't a lie. Realizing a cultivation method without seeing the formula. I can't teach it not only because of the first difficulty but also because of the second reason. I hope you understand that. Understand? Yes. What if I can't understand? What? I really want to learn that from you. How can I teach something when I don't even know the formula? And I already said I can't give you Shaolin's secrets. Even if I kill that monk Imanhei? This bastard. As soon as those words ended, Jajimjong's expression distorted fiercely. He may not care about others, but he absolutely couldn't forgive anyone touching his master, Grand Monk Gongjon, and his only friend, the monk Imanhei. Then one of us will have to die here today. At those words, Mok Jung-un chuckled and said, "Will it really be me?" Unlike his laughter, the thick murderous intent emanating from his eyes. Feeling this, Jajimjong's hands and feet trembled faintly. How can a guy who hasn't even reached his prime have such a strong oppressive aura? "Even if this drunkard dies, if you touch Imanhei, I will never forgive you." He was fully prepared. If he had cared about his life, he would have already told everything. Mok Jung-un, who had been closely observing Jajimjong's reaction, shrugged his shoulders and said, "It seems to be true." Huh. Jajimjong, who had been gathering energy in his fists and was ready to fight at any moment, couldn't hide his bewilderment. Mok Jung-un said to him, "Seeing that someone who cherishes that monk's life so preciously only considers fighting with his life on the line as the answer, it doesn't seem like you're trying to deceive me." "Huh? Are you testing this drunkard now?" "If it's a test, then it's a test. I don't believe in those lip service words of swearing to the heavens." So he was testing him? Jajimjong clicked his tongue. However, if he could make Mok Jung-un give up his request for the unsurpassed power even in this way, he didn't mind. "It's unpleasant to be tested, but since the reason I couldn't accept your request was the cause, I won't blame you. Instead, tell me your other request. If you're going to make excuses one after another, there seems to be no point in even making a request." "Damn it. This isn't because I'm deliberately trying to refuse, but because I really can't help it." Yes. I'm sure that's the case. So if you refuse the request again this time, I'm thinking of just putting the resentful spirit back into that person's body." "What? Wasn't that the condition between us in the first place? If you can't accept it, we just return to the original state." Mesh. Jajimjong gritted his teeth at Mok Jung-un's words. It wasn't wrong, but he couldn't help but get angry at him threatening like this. So Jajimjong struck his thick chest with his fist and said, "Thud thud." Chapter 211, On the Boat. Whoosh. The rain was still a downpour itself. Before boarding the boat, 3 men were gathered together. They were Siep Chun, the 3rd Captain Commander of the Heaven and Earth Society's main branch, Mong Muyak, the Deputy Commander and son of the Vice Leader, and Jajimjong, the exiled monk and demon subduing Fist Master of Shaolin. These 3 had gathered for a single reason. And that was, "I'll be honest. Jajimjong. I can't trust your oath of loyalty." It was because of the exiled monk Jajimjong's oath of loyalty. The reason Mong Muyak was expressing his disapproval was simple. It was due to Jajimjong's background and notoriety. He was a former monk of Shaolin, considered the root of the righteous martial world, and after becoming an exiled monk, he committed eccentric acts like a madman, regardless of right or wrong. Could such a person really be trusted? At Mong Muyak's attitude, Jajimjong snorted and said, "I don't care if you bastards believe me or not." "What? Even in a fucked up situation I always keep my word. At his words, Seop Chun clutched his stomach and laughed. Ha! A fucked up situation you say? Are you saying swearing loyalty to our lord is fucked up? Did you think this drunkard would say he's happy about it? Jang was someone who never hid his own emotions. At his words, Mong Muyak became even more wary, but on the other hand Seop Chun, who originally had a hearty personality, rather liked it. You wouldn't be happy, of course. You were caught in the Lord's scheme and swore loyalty, so how could you feel good about it? You're stating the obvious. But Jang, you're also a man of honor, so whether you like it or not, I believe you'll keep the oath you made yourself. Stop emphasizing what this drunkard has said over and over. Even without you bastards nagging, I'll protect that damn fellow until I die. Jang had a temperament of not looking back once he decided on something. So although he couldn't contain his anger and lashed out at that moment, he was ultimately pressured by Mok Jae-un's oppressive aura and swore loyalty. In fact, there was a sentiment he couldn't reveal even to them. It's for Mun-hae Master and Shaolin. It was truly strange. Jang felt an odd fear from a fellow who hadn't even reached his prime. Even if not right now, if that bastard made up his mind, it seemed he would bring great harm not only to his friend the monk Mun-hae but also to Shaolin. This was a premonition stemming from pure instinct. Caught in this premonition, Jang swore loyalty after receiving an agreement from Mok Jae-un that he would never touch them. That moment was truly disheartening. Did I leave Shaolin and live just to end up like this? That was the moment he thought so. He was suddenly gripped by this thought. Live to end up like this? Huh. There was something his master and Sutra Pavilion master, Grand Monk Gongjon, always taught. He said that everything has cause and effect in a natural course, and no matter how much one tries to escape it, one can only flow according to that natural course in the end. Perhaps even him having these eyes and becoming an exiled monk was to face this moment. Natural course. When he considered all of this to be the natural course, the afflictions in his heart disappeared. Since he had already made up his mind to do it, regret and lingering attachment were all useless, and he just thought that if this was also the path he had to take, he would do his best. Then Mong Muyak said to him, I'll be watching. No. This drunkard said he'll do it, so who are you to say this and that? Please calm down. This friend originally talks like that. Seop Chun grinned and stopped Jang. At first he was wary of him, who was called one of the three madmen, but after actually getting to know him he thought he was honest rather than crazy and got along well with him. Jang also seemed to feel the same way as he said, Still, you're the only one who can be reasoned with. Instead of you, since it's come to this, how about we introduce ourselves? My name is Seop Chun and I'm 29 years old. As you can see, I mainly use a sword. Mong Muyak, you do it too. Introducing myself so embarrassingly. We'll have to be together to serve the Lord anyway, so are you going to act like that? At Seop Chun's words, Mong Muyak shook his head and said briefly, Mong Muyak, 26 years old, a swordsman. There. Our introductions are roughly like this, so will you do it too? At these words, Jang stared intently at Seop Chun. In fact, he also didn't particularly like introducing himself like this. But since he had decided to serve Mok Jae-un as his lord and might have to be with them for life, it was awkward to just let it pass. Ahem, as you know, my name is Jang and I prefer the strong fist technique. Why don't you mention your age? Are you skipping it because you're much older than us? At those words, Jang frowned. He had never told anyone his age since leaving Shaolin. So he hesitated, wondering if he really had to say it, but eventually spoke. My age is 26. As soon as those words ended, both Mong Muyak and Seop Chun were dumbfounded. Based on his fierce face and the atmosphere he exuded alone, Jang looked to be in his mid-40s. But he's in his 20s? This kind of face is the same age as me? Mong Muyak made a dumbfounded expression. Was he the only one who couldn't fight the ravages of time and had his face wither away? This kind of old face was the first he had ever seen. The exiled monk Jang glared at Mong Muyak and said, You bastard, I really don't like the look in your eyes. Should I send you to Buddha's side today? He was ready to strike him at any moment. Seop Chun had to hurriedly stop him. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Through the rollers made of dozens of wooden pillars, the boat reached right in front of the river. Originally, it would need to move a bit more to float the boat on the river, but since the water had been overflowing due to the downpour for a long time, it didn't take that long to move it. Everyone who needed to board the boat had already boarded. Slowly. It needs to move more slowly. Yes. At the command of the resentful soul Ha-Yun, who was possessing the body of the captain Wu In-Yom, the retired naval soldiers moved in unison, and the bow of the boat entered the river. Fush. Certainly because the boat was large, when the bow entered, the water surged upward. But along with that, the boat that was moving forward started to tilt sideways with a creaking sound. This was due to the tremendous current of the river swollen by the downpour. Is this really possible to cross? Seop Chun, who had been watching this with excitement while standing at the front of the bow, grabbed the deck and clicked his tongue. If this was the case with just the head of the boat entering, it was worrisome that the boat would be swept away and capsized as soon as the entire boat entered. Then, as if the bow suddenly received strength, the tilted part started to straighten up. What was going on? The current was still rough, but the boat was straightening up on its own. That was because those things. Jiamzhong, what do you see? In Jia Jiamzhong's eyes, numerous resentful souls were clinging to the side of the boat's bow. They were supporting the boat that was about to be swept away by the current. It was a truly amazing sight. With the boat's performance itself and the help of this many resentful souls, it seemed there was a sufficient possibility of crossing the river. After some time, the hull was completely in the water. Creak, creak. The boat was rocking in the tremendous current and it was a mess. Everyone in Mok Jaeongun's party had learned martial arts, so they didn't easily fall over, but they couldn't help their bodies swaying. It wouldn't be strange if the boat capsized at any moment. However, fortunately, numerous resentful souls were supporting this boat. Who, before boarding the boat, they had completely destroyed the main hull of the estate and held a memorial service for the resentful souls, so it might have been a kind of repayment for that. Thanks to that, despite the rough current, the boat didn't capsize and slowly moved forward. Of course, to be precise, it was moving diagonally to match the current. The resentful soul Ha-Yun, who was possessing the body of Wu In-Yom, tapped his head and said to Mok Jaeongun, "According to the experience and knowledge in this person's head, it will take time to cross the river, but if we move like this, we can somehow cross it." I see. Thank you for your efforts. Mok Jaeongun smiled and bowed with his hands clasped to the resentful soul Ha-Yun. There was a glint in Ha-Yun's eyes as he watched that sight. That was understandable because, in the first place, although they had fought, they had reached an agreement, so there was no need to argue, but this human was truly unique. He was a resentful soul. Even monks were afraid of or wary of someone like him, but this human was treating him normally. Was it to look good because they had to safely cross the river? No. It's different. This person had no difference in the way he looked at the dead or the living. It was as if he was looking directly at the existence itself. A truly strange human indeed. Was it because of this aspect that a high-ranking existence like her followed this human? While he was lost in thought, Mok Jaeongun said, "If it's not rude, may I ask you something?" "What is it?" "Apart from your ill fate with the Wu family, reaching the blue spirit rank means you held a grudge lasting over 100 years, so may I ask what that is?" It was a question that was sufficiently rude. If he was with a high-ranking resentful soul and had such excellent monastic technique skills, he should know well what a grudge meant to a resentful soul. However, Mok Jaeongun was staring intently as if he was genuinely curious. As if it was pure curiosity. He could have just ignored it, but since there was no point in making an enemy with someone like this anyway, the resentful soul Ha-Yun finally opened his mouth. "I couldn't protect." "What do you mean you couldn't protect?" "I couldn't protect the one I had to protect at all costs." "Ah." Mok Jaeongun looked at the resentful soul Ha-Yun with a puzzled expression. Since most grudges stemmed from lamentation and the desire for revenge, he had thought Ha-Yun would talk about some object of resentment. But the grudge of the resentful soul Ha-Yun unexpectedly stemmed from loyalty. He couldn't leave this world for a long time because of his self-blame for not being able to protect someone. He was more upright than he looks. Chong Ryong also seemed to view the resentful soul Ha-Yun differently, as she evaluated him like that. However, Mok Jaeongun didn't have as much of an impression as her. He just thought that the resentful soul Ha-Yun had held a grudge for a long time for this reason. "I see. Thank you for your answer." With these words, Mok Jaeongun left the bow with a smile. Everyone had gathered at the bow to watch the boat move, but he was heading to the stern where no one was. He's absurd. What is? I thought the mortal bastard was considering that fellow as a divine spirit when he asked what kind of grudge he held. His rank is high, so it's tempting, but there are no vacant positions now. That's true. The number of servant spirits Mok Jae-un could currently take was limited. If it were possible, he would have taken every resentful soul he met as a servant spirit and exploited them. Mok Jae-un had asked out of pure curiosity about the resentful soul Hyun being followed by resentful souls that were mere evil spirits, regardless of their rank. Walking leisurely like that, Mok Jae-un stopped halfway to the stern. Why are you doing that? Will you say you can't see it this time too? What are you? Chong Ryong discovered something. That something was a person sitting on the deck at the rear of the boat, holding a curved long bamboo fishing rod. Just by looking at the back of the white hair, one could tell that he was an old man. How did that old mortal board the boat? That's what I want to ask. When they were launching the boat, he wasn't visible anywhere nearby. But how did he get on the boat? The puzzled Mok Jae-un asked Chong Ryong. First of all, you can see him, right? Yes. Then Mok Jae-un opened the demonic power he had obtained from his right Samgon eye. First he was curious about the identity of that person. Judging by the bamboo raincoat he was wearing, he didn't seem to be a spiritual body like a resentful soul or a monster-like existence. But it was extremely strange that there was no sign or indication of his presence at all. However, throb. The moment he opened the power of the third eye, strong pressure and red blood vessels surged in Mok Jae-un's right eye. Splatter. Then bloody tears flowed from his right eye. The startled Chong Ryong shouted, "Mortal!" But Mok Jae-un, feeling the intraocular pressure that seemed like it would burst, hurriedly closed the power again. And then he grabbed his right eye, which was shedding bloody tears. It was to disperse the residual true energy that had raised the intraocular pressure by inducing death energy. Fortunately, Mok Jae-un's judgment was correct. As the energy dispersed, the intraocular pressure quickly subsided as well. Why are you doing that? I can't read his energy. What do you mean? I mean it literally. When he opened the power of the third eye, he could examine the flow of energy in detail with his right eye. He could even read the traces of primordial energy, demonic energy, and spiritual energy, regardless of what they were. But the moment he opened it, his vision turned pure white. He couldn't understand why, but he tried to read the energy while enduring the white light, but the intraocular pressure rose and he couldn't open his eyes properly due to the pain. Why is my eye filled with white light? Unless the entire surroundings are filled with energy. For a moment, Mok Jae-un's left eye narrowed. It was hard to believe. Could it be? Right then. Mortal. Behind you. At Chong Ryong's cry, Mok Jae-un looked at the deck where the old man in the bamboo raincoat holding the bamboo fishing rod had been sitting. There was no one there. That meant, as Chong Ryong shouted, someone was behind him, but I can't even sense his presence. This was a separate issue from the heavy rain pouring down. The opponent was a monster who could completely conceal his presence. In a split second, while he was contemplating what to do, a voice came from behind. It wasn't mere coincidence that you saw this old man earlier. Chapter 212, On the Boat 3. It wasn't mere coincidence that you saw this old man earlier. At the voice coming from behind him, Mok Jae-un's eyes sharpened. Earlier. Mok Jae-un recalled the moment before entering the village. The old man's figure that had disappeared in the instant he took his eyes off him. He was definitely only looking at the river then. But does that mean he noticed that I was looking at him? Realizing this, Mok Jae-un's thoughts became complicated, unlike before. The old man behind him seemed to be a monster whose strength he couldn't even guess. Then Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jae-un's ears. Mortal. Did you not notice at all? He hadn't noticed. Both with his physical eyes and his energy perception. Grip. Mok Jae-un found that his hand had unconsciously tensed up at some point. He hadn't been this tense even when he met the leader of the Heaven and Earth Society, one of the 6 heavens who was called the pinnacle of the current martial world. Of course, although the leader had weakened due to prolonged illness, this felt completely different. The gap was so overwhelming that all the techniques he was devising in his head felt meaningless. Just who is this old man? Chong Ryong was equally surprised. The Mok Jaeongun she had been watching never showed much tension no matter what powerful opponent he faced. That was probably due to his strong mental fortitude of not fearing death or pain. But this was the first time she saw this mortal bastard being so tense. Just who is the identity of this old mortal? While she was puzzled, the old man opened his mouth. I was just trying to express my gratitude, but this is interesting. What's interesting? I was wondering how you saw me, but your energy is extraordinary. Just what are you? Even this old man who has lived a long time has never seen someone like you, young man, possessing the energy that dead beings or monsters would have. At the old man's words, Mok Jaeongun's left eye trembled. This was a first. A living being, not a resentful soul, was accurately detecting his death energy. Moreover, even the fact that he possessed demonic energy in his body. How did he discern his energy when he was clearly a living existence, not a spiritual body? While he was surprised, the old man said, but this isn't all. Death energy, cold energy, poison energy, even the demonic energy of a monster, you possess all sorts of dangerous energies. What? Mok Jaeongun was genuinely dumbfounded. Just who is this old man? He was reading most of the energies without even making contact with his body. However, judging by the fact that he didn't mention the demonic energy that converged all these energies into one, it seemed he couldn't detect that. But from the moment he read the death energy, it was as good as discerning most of the energies. So Mok Jaeongun bluntly said, Elder, just who are you? Why did you board this boat? It was doubtful whether he would give an answer, but while asking this, he concentrated his true energy on the soles of his feet. It was in preparation for any situation. Right then, young man, I have no intention of harming you, so relax. He's reaching for your back. Papapapapak. At Chong Ryong's words, Mok Jaeongun reflexively used the brilliant water-surpassing step to try to distance himself from the old man with high-speed movement. Mok Jaeongun, who instantly put distance between them, turned his body. But the old man, whom he thought would chase after him or make some kind of response, was standing still with his hands behind his back. Mok Jaeongun's eyes gleamed as he got to see the old man's face directly. He had an impression from seeing him holding the bamboo fishing rod and not being able to see his face properly, but it was completely the opposite. The old man's face was not dark and dull, but exceedingly white, and his white beard was neat as if he had groomed it. He had an aura as if he might have been a scholar in his youth. However, there was one place that uniquely didn't match this atmosphere. His eyes were extremely fierce. Then the old man opened his mouth. I thought you were cold-blooded, but you have a more curious side than I expected. I don't like being grabbed from behind. Is that so? But with your level of cultivation, you should have already guessed that no matter how much you struggle, it would be meaningless against me. Mok Jaeongun didn't deny those words. The bamboo fishing rod the old man was holding behind his back. At some point that fishing rod started to feel like a sharp sword. It felt like if it moved and flew towards him, his body would be split in half the moment it grazed him. Perhaps because of that tension, all of Mok Jaeongun's nerves were focused solely on the old man. Then the old man looked at Mok Jaeongun's face and spoke with a glint in his eyes. Even though you're young, I thought you would be over 30, but this is unexpected. Thank you for seeing me as mature, but I haven't even passed my prime yet. Haven't even passed your prime? Ho ho ho. The old man burst into laughter. Puzzled, Mok Jaeongun asked, Why are you laughing? It's a truly coincidental and mysterious thing. To see such talent on a boat like this again. What? It's nothing. Just old memories coming to mind. Mok Jaeongun showed no particular interest in the old man's tone that seemed to recall memories. Mok Jaeongun's concern was solely one thing. Why did this old man of unknown identity board this boat and approach him? Then the old man lightly shook his head and said, Relax. If I had intended to harm you, I would have done so long ago. I apologize. I'm very suspicious. Is that so? It's good that you're honest. Thank you for taking it well. But if you're not trying to harm me, why did you board this boat? Right. You asked that. My memory isn't what it used to be after passing 100 years old. 100. At the old man's words, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. Although his beard and hair were white, he had fewer wrinkles than expected. Judging by his appearance alone, even considering that he was a profound expert, he had thought he would be around 60 to 70 years old. But he's saying he's this old? While he was inwardly surprised, the old man said, I seem to have unintentionally made you wary, but I just wanted to express my gratitude. Gratitude? That's right. Mok Jae-young tilted his head. He had no particular contact or connection with the old man, so he couldn't understand what he was grateful for. While he was puzzled, the old man intently looked in the direction of the land they had left, where the village was located. As Mok Jae-young followed his gaze and looked there, the old man parted his lips. When I came to this place after a long time, I found that someone had dug up the grave and shrine of an old acquaintance of mine. An old acquaintance? Yes. He was a truly upright man with deep loyalty. At the old man's words, Mok Jae-young couldn't hide his inner surprise. Could this old man have been an acquaintance of the resentful soul Ha-yoon? Ha! Chong Ryong also seemed surprised as she let out an exclamation. That was understandable because the resentful soul Ha-yoon was a high-ranking resentful soul of the blue spirit rank. To reach this rank, one had to remain in the world for over 100 years while holding a grudge. That meant the old man really was over 100 years old. Then Mok Jae-young asked, puzzled. Chong Ryong might know that he's over 100 years old, right? Chong Ryong had absorbed the demonic energy of the Sea King and reached the indigo spirit rank, but in reality she had spent about 100 years as a resentful soul. If that was the case, it could mean that this old man roamed the martial world in the same era as Chong Ryong. However, I don't know. You don't know. That person is not in my memory. Are you sure? If he had lived such a long time and possessed unfathomable strength, he must have been famous in his youth. But Chong Ryong seemed to have no idea. Could it be that you can't recognize him because his appearance has aged? Aged? Yes, that could be. Then try to find out the old mortal's name. It might be someone I've heard of. Appearance and voice inevitably change over time, so it was possible not to recognize him. It was even more so for someone who had lived for over 100 years. So Mok Jae-young decided to find out the old man's name through conversation. By any chance, is the person you're referring to someone named Ha-yoon? Yes, that's him. In fact, while I was pondering what to do while fishing, you destroyed that estate. Thanks to that, it seems my dead friend's grudge has been somewhat relieved, so it's fortunate. At these words, Mok Jae-young was puzzled. Something was confusing. Whether the old man could see resentful souls or not. Since he could even detect death energy, which could be called the energy of the dead, it seemed like there was nothing he couldn't do, but it was strange. Judging by the way he was speaking now, it didn't seem like it, so it was ambiguous. Without revealing this doubt, Mok Jae-young said, that wasn't intentional. Whether it was intentional or not, I wanted to express my gratitude for doing what I was going to do on my behalf. Listening to the old man's words, it seemed that Woo In-yeom and his family were destined to be punished in some way. In any case, what was certain was that fortunately, this monster-like old man didn't really seem to intend to harm him. If that was the case, he could ask without worry. Mok Jae-young respectfully clasped his hands together, bowed his head and said, I apologize, but since meeting like this is also a connection, may I ask for your respected name as a junior? My name? Yes. To that question, the old man shook his head and replied, it's a name that has long been forgotten. What will you do by hearing such a name? But, ho, do you think a connection won't be made just because you know or don't know a name? Connections tend to take shape in one way or another. Since you put it that way, I have no choice. It seemed the old man had no intention of revealing his name or identity. Mok Jae-young, who judged that there was nothing good about prying further to someone overwhelmingly stronger than him, quickly gave up. He should be grateful just for not having ill fate with such a monster-like person. Then the old man said, so I want to make a small repayment for this gratitude and connection. Repayment. By the looks of it, you seem to have learned the sword. The old man suddenly reached out his hand towards Mok Jae-young. Then, the scabbard of the evil commandment sword at Mok Jae-young's waist flew off with the sword intact. Then it was sucked into the old man's hand. Puzzled by what his intention was, the old man said, I hope this will be a sufficient repayment. As soon as those words ended, the evil commandment sword slipped out of the scabbard, revealing its blade. Surprised, Mok Jae-young shouted, Elder, that sword is... He was about to say it was dangerous to hold it carelessly because it was a demonic sword. But an amazing sight unfolded. The moment the old man gripped the hilt of the evil commandment sword that had been drawn from the scabbard, a strong resonance poured out from the evil commandment sword, and the blade vibrated rapidly, but soon, not long after, it stopped. He subdued the sword? Seeing this, Mok Jaeongun was genuinely unable to hide his surprise. The one who held the evil commandment sword was supposed to reveal their desires due to its demonic nature. But even though the evil commandment sword revealed its demonic nature while emitting a resonance, its sword spirit was rather suppressed not long after. While he was amazed, the old man muttered, "Truly coincidental. The demonic sword of O Yezi." The old man discerned the identity of the sword in an instant. As expected, he was no ordinary old man. "Elder, are you all right?" He obviously looked fine, but Mok Jaeongun asked out of courtesy. Then the old man looked at the sword and showed a gentle smile. "Young man, you make me recall many old things that were about to be forgotten." "What do you mean by that?" "No. Never mind. Rather, look at this." As soon as those words ended, the old man wielded the evil commandment sword he was holding and drew a magnificent trajectory as if performing a sword dance. Swish. Swish swish swish. Mok Jaeongun's eyes didn't leave the sword as he watched this. The clean trajectory that seemed to draw the full moon in the night sky was too shocking. How could a sword technique that looked so simple have no flaws? Swish 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 swish. The sword strikes were so outstanding and flawless that he couldn't take his eyes off them. Chong Ryong was equally surprised. She was also an excellent swordsman when she was alive, so she could tell that each stance the old man wielded went beyond a simple sword technique and led to a peerless sword move. However, the sword moves the old man displayed with the evil commandment sword felt quite familiar. Why does this sword feel so familiar? Mok Jaeongun felt the same way. At some point, everything about the sword techniques the old man wielded felt extremely familiar. It was clearly a sword technique he was seeing for the first time, but it felt familiar. What on earth was going on? While he was filled with doubts, Chong Ryong spoke in a surprised voice. "This can't be. What's wrong? Mortal." "Yes. It's the Moonless Void Sword. Moonless Sky Sword." At that moment, the formula of the moves written on the paper Chong Ryong had hidden, which he had seen in the treasury of Corpse Blood Valley, came to Mok Jaeongun's mind. While showing the hidden formula, Chong Ryong had said, "Consider it your fortune. These are the only remaining sword moves of the Moonless Void Sword, one of the 5 great sword techniques that once symbolized the old martial world." Along with that, the peerless swordsman he had seen in a state of selflessness while imprinting the formula began to overlap with the old man. Chapter 213 On the Boat 4. Moonless Void Sword 1. That was the sword technique written on the paper Chong Ryong had hidden in the treasury of Corpse Blood Valley. She had called the Moonless Void Sword one of the 5 great sword techniques that symbolized the old martial world. The trajectories of the sword drawn by Mok Jaeongun's eyes. In Mok Jaeongun's mind as he watched this, the image of the peerless swordsman he had seen in a state of selflessness while imprinting the formula overlapped with the old man. Swish swish swish. The refreshing sword path reminiscent of the full moon. This caused a thrill that made the memory of that time pale in comparison. Entering the treasury of Corpse Blood Valley and experiencing a state of selflessness through imprinting as Chong Ryong had told him to recite the sword techniques. But this sword technique caused an incomparable thrill compared to those. Swish swish. It's different. What surprised Mok Jaeongun even more was the difference in the sword techniques. Even in the sword techniques he had seen in a state of selflessness, there were no unnecessary sword paths, and each sword path was beautiful yet thoroughly focused on killing the opponent. However, the sword techniques the old man displayed went beyond this and even broke free from the framework of existing sword paths. Is like seeing a new world. Confucius said that when one reaches the age of 70, one can follow one's heart's desire, go where the heart leads, and do what the heart wants without deviating from any rules, laws, systems, or principles. The old man's sword was like that. It evolved the techniques freely, breaking away from the framework of existing techniques. Nevertheless, amazingly, this was still the Moonless Void Sword. I've never thought about it this way. So this is how techniques can be displayed. It completely shattered conventional wisdom. Mok Jaeongun couldn't help but be genuinely amazed. This wasn't a sword that could be displayed simply by imprinting it in one's head and remembering it. This shock didn't only come to Mok Jaeongun. Although she had no physical body, Chong Ryong was also an excellent swordsman when she was alive, so the moment she saw this, she was astounded and achieved an awakening. This is the sword. She was the one who had gained enlightenment after seeing the two techniques of the Moonless Void Sword and created the sword technique of the moon. But after seeing this, a new understanding of the sword blossomed in her mind. At this moment, a gap arose between Chong Ryong and Mok Jae-eun. Unlike Chong Ryong, who was trapped in a wooden puppet and purely observing the sword techniques themselves, Mok Jae-eun was also seeing how the surrounding energy moved with each sword swing. This difference could be said to be quite significant. Swish. Not long after, the old man stopped swinging the sword. As he stopped, a faint glow was flowing from the blade of the evil commandment sword. It was as if even the evil commandment sword, called a demonic sword, was paying homage to the amazing sword techniques the old man had demonstrated. Looking at the evil commandment sword, the old man opened his mouth. Excellent. Thanks to you, this old man's sword could shine even brighter. At those words, the evil commandment sword vibrated and emitted a sword cry. Seeing this, Mok Jae-eun clicked his tongue inwardly. If the sword spirit of that demonic sword, which was so picky about people, was like this, he thought the old man must have reached the highest realm in swordsmanship. The old man looked at Mok Jae-eun and said, "Did you see it?" "Yes." "How much do you remember?" At those words, Mok Jae-eun stopped himself from answering that he remembered everything without much thought. He felt that the meaning behind the old man's question wasn't that. He could remember everything. He could even display the exact movements the old man had made. But that was just a shell. So Mok Jae-eun replied, "I don't remember well." When he said that, the old man's eyes narrowed. Inwardly, the old man was surprised. Although he had shown the sword to Mok Jae-eun, he thought there would be a limit to what he could realize. But he never expected to hear such an answer from Mok Jae-eun. "You don't remember well?" "Yes." "I see." The corners of the old man's mouth twitched. Since he was a swordsman, he thought this much would be a sufficient repayment. But it seemed Mok Jae-eun's potential was beyond what he had thought. So the old man raised the sword again. Then look again. Swish, 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 swish. This time he performed a sword dance just like before. However, just like earlier, the trajectory of the sword was incomparably beautiful. But there was a difference. The sword path had become even simpler. If the previous one was like a waxing moon, now the sword technique had become even more concise and clear, as if it had become a half moon. Unlike the first time, the sword technique ended halfway through. As he lowered the sword, the blade of the evil commandment sword vibrated even faster. The old man asked Mok Jae-eun, "How about this time? Even as I'm watching, I can't remember." Hearing these words, the corners of the old man's mouth rose even higher. Then the old man held the evil commandment sword again, assumed a stance and said, "I see." "Then look again." As soon as those words ended, the old man displayed the sword technique again. The sword technique was quite different from before. The sword became even more concise and closer to simply swinging rather than being beautiful. Nevertheless, Mok Jae-eun's eyes didn't leave the trajectory of the sword. It was like the gaze of someone in a state of selflessness. Swish swish. The old man's sword ended even faster than the second time he displayed it. It was almost not even half as long. After swinging the sword like this, the old man stared intently at Mok Jae-eun's eyes and asked, "How is it?" At these words, Mok Jae-eun let out a long sigh. Seeing this, the old man's eyes gleamed even more. The old man had realized from this breath alone that Mok Jae-eun had been with him. Eventually, Mok Jae-eun opened his mouth. "With my lacking talent, I forgot everything even though I saw it before my eyes." Hearing those words, the old man burst into hearty laughter. "Ha ha ha." After laughing like that for a while, the old man stopped and said to Mok Jae-eun, "I just wanted to make a small repayment, but it has become interesting. It seems excessive for a small repayment. This is also your fortune." At the old man's words, Mok Jae-eun suddenly recalled it. Strangely, he had felt the moonless void sword in the sword techniques the old man had displayed, and he had felt an overlap with the peerless swordsman he had seen in the formula from the Corpse Blood Valley report. So he wanted to ask, "Elder, by any chance the moonless?" "Oh, I almost took this with me." "What?" "Thing." Click. Before he could even ask, the old man cut him off and sheathed the evil commandment sword into its scabbard. Then he threw the evil commandment sword towards Mok Jae-eun. As Mok Jaeongun lightly caught the sword, the old man said, "It seems the repayment is sufficient and you should also wrap it up, so this old man will take his leave now." "What?" At these words, Mok Jaeongun frowned. They were still in the middle of the river, so where was he going? With this level of current, no matter how much of an expert one was, it was impossible not to be swept away. So Mok Jaeongun said, "Can't you wait until the boat arrives and then get off? The place this old man is going to is not across the river. But here. It's fine. And don't pay too much attention to a passing connection." With those words, the old man shouldered the bamboo fishing rod and tried to move towards the deck. It was truly an insane act. He couldn't let him go like this without even properly finding out his identity. Mok Jaeongun tried to stop the old man. "Eld." Swish. At that moment, the old man's figure disappeared. Mok Jaeongun hurriedly flew towards the deck where the old man had approached. And he looked outside the boat, but he couldn't see anything. No matter how dark and heavy the rain was pouring on the river, Mok Jaeongun's eyesight was different from ordinary people. But he couldn't see anything around him. What the hell? Was he really a living human? He disappeared in an instant and there was no way to know where he had gone. "Chong Ryong, did you see it?" So Mok Jaeongun asked Chong Ryong. But Chong Ryong didn't respond. Thinking something might be wrong, he touched the wooden puppet in his bosom, but she was still sealed inside it. That meant she seemed to be lost in deep thought to the point of not hearing his words. Did Chong Ryong also realize something after seeing that? Seemed to be the case. Indeed, he also wanted to organize the things the old man had shown him earlier. After looking around for a while, searching for traces of the old man, Mok Jaeongun eventually gave up and sat cross-legged on the floor. Then he closed his eyes and recalled the sword the old man had displayed from the beginning. The bow of the boat. Seop Chun, the third captain commander of the Heaven and Earth Society's main branch, gulped down the liquor contained in the gourd bottle passed to him by the exiled monk Jajiam Jong. "Phew. This is killer. You bastard at least know the taste of liquor." "Ha. How can you call yourself a man if you don't know the taste of liquor? Drinking while being drenched by the pouring rain on a boat that seems like it might capsize at any moment. The taste is truly exquisite. Liquor should originally be drunk in a place like this to be thrilling." "Well said. In that sense, another sip." Gulp gulp. "Hey. Is that a sip? Are you planning to drink it all by yourself? Let me drink with you." They were two people who got along exceptionally well. At some point they had their arms around each other's shoulders, drinking sip by sip and were in high spirits. Seeing these two, Mong Muyak, the son of the vice leader, clicked his tongue. Foolish ones. With the rain pouring down like this, can they even feel if the liquor is going into their nose or mouth? Anyway, they were guys who didn't suit him. It was at that moment when he was looking at them with disdain. But Mong Muyak closed his eyes and collapsed to the floor. He wasn't the only one. Seop Chun and Jajiam Jong, who had been in high spirits with their arms around each other's shoulders, had also closed their eyes at some point and lay on the floor falling asleep. Seeing them like this, the resentful Sol Hayun, who was holding the rudder, frowned. It was strange that they had suddenly collapsed all at once. But then, "I almost forgot about you." At the voice coming from the side, the resentful Sol Hayun was startled and turned his head. There stood an old man wearing a bamboo raincoat and shouldering a bamboo fishing rod. Seeing this, Hayun tried to kneel on the floor. "Elder." But before he could do that, the old man shook his head and stopped Hayun from kneeling. Then the old man said, "If I had paid a little more attention, your grave wouldn't have been dug up." "I'm sorry." "No. How is that your fault, elder? It happened because I was lacking in virtue." At Hayun's words, the old man shook his head. "Even after all this time has passed, you're still the same. It's time for you to let yourself go now." "No. I still need to receive more punishment." "Don't say that. That child wouldn't want you to be like this either." Hayun lowered his head silently with a bitter look in his eyes. The old man tapped his shoulder as if to encourage him. Then Hayun raised his head again and said, "I apologize. Your lamentation must be deeper than mine, yet you still comfort this unworthy one. I am simply grateful." "You don't need to be grateful. Understand. Anyway, the matter has been resolved safely, and I got to see your face after a long time, so this old man will take his leave now." At those words, Hayun couldn't hide his regret. He had hoped not to see the old man this year, but he had never missed visiting this place once every 10 years to take care of the grave and shrine. It wasn't a bad thing for him, but it wasn't the same for the old man. You still haven't found it? At that question the old man shook his head. It's not easy. I'd rather find a suitable human body and help you. No. It would be helping me if you push yourself appropriately and go to a good place. Elder. You don't have to do that. I'm in a good mood today because I recalled old memories. At those words Hyun asked, puzzled. Memories, you say? I greeted a young man who did my task on my behalf, and it reminded me of that fellow after a long time. At those words Hyun's eyes gleamed. By that fellow do you mean your son-in-law? The old man showed a faint smile. It was a sign of affirmation. Seeing that, Hyun couldn't hide his inner surprise. It had been a really long time since the old man had mentioned him. If that was the case, it meant the old man also highly regarded that extraordinary young man. To the extent of reminding you of him, is he that great? To this question the old man recalled earlier and spoke in a meaningful voice. His talent alone would make even that fellow pale in comparison. Chapter 214, Secret Mission 1. Scrape. The hull of the boat scraped against the shore as it moved up. Fush, fush, fush. The anchors attached to the left, right and rear of the boat were lowered, but the boat still shook due to the rough current. However, they succeeded in crossing the river in less than half an hour. Seop Chun, Jajiam Jong and Mong Muyak, who had woken up by the time they arrived, seemed to be in a dazed state with blank expressions on their faces. They couldn't even properly recognize when they had fallen asleep and woken up. They only had the feeling that they had taken a short nap. Mok Jaeongun, who had been looking at them strangely, approached the resentful Sol Hyun standing in front of the rudder and greeted him with a polite bow. Thanks to you we were able to cross the river safely. Thank you. I only kept the agreement, so there's no need to thank me too much. An agreement is an agreement and gratitude is gratitude. I understand. Then be careful as you disembark. Before you go, may I ask you one more thing? What is it? By any chance did you see an old man carrying a bamboo fishing rod? No, do you know him? At these words, the resentful Sol Hyun momentarily hesitated. But he soon shook his head and replied. I don't know. Do you really not know? That's right. At the resentful Sol Hyun's answer, Mok Jaeongun chuckled and lightly bowed again, then turned to leave. Watching Mok Jaeongun's back, the resentful Sol Hyun recalled what had happened earlier. If he asks about me, tell him you don't know anything. There was a request from the elder, so he hid it, but that cunning young man seemed to have noticed. At least the fact that the elder and himself had a connection. However, unless the elder wanted it, it was better not to know his identity. If he truly possesses talent exceeding his, as the elder's discernment suggests, surely the connection will be made again someday. Around the beginning of the evening hour. In front of an abandoned temple of Guan Yu on the east side of Mount Giju in Anak County of Hunan Province. There, sitting around a bonfire, were 3 men eating roasted deer meat. Among the 3 men, who appeared to be in their mid-20s, one man stood out in particular. His face was white as if he had applied powder, and his lips were red as if he had applied rouge. He was even eating the meat by daintily tearing it off instead of biting into it in one mouthful. Seeing him like this, a man with droopy eyes and a blue headband around his forehead clicked his tongue and said, Yubong, you've completely become a eunuch. Ho ho. I've been living as a eunuch for nearly 2 years now, so it's only natural to say that. Putting other things aside, can't you do something about that laughter? How can I change what's already ingrained in my mouth? Please bear with me a little, Master Gonyong. Ho ho ho. Ha. The grating laughter was so annoying that the man with a blue headband around his head, called Gonyong, let out a sigh. Across from him, a man with a beard who was tearing off and eating the meat, stopped and called out in an irritated voice. Gonyong. What is it? We've waited long enough, so how about we start heading back? Head back, you say? That's right. Anyway, the rear unit won't be arriving today. But OKGI. The man called Okidai interrupted Gonyong, who was about to say something, with a raised voice. It's not just one day, but it has been raining for nearly half a month. Rivers are overflowing everywhere and there have even been landslides. How can they possibly meet the deadline? As he said, the damage caused by the rain that had continued for half a month was indescribable. Especially around the rivers, They had heard that it was impossible to even launch boats. Considering this, Okagi judged that even if they were masters, it was impossible for them to gather at the rendezvous point by the deadline. Ganyang stroked his chin with a troubled expression. The Imperial Guard martial examination was 3 days away. They had to arrive in the imperial capital, Kaifeng, within 2 days before that and fully brief them on the true purpose of the secret mission and the necessary requirements. Moreover, this wasn't the end. There was also someone they had to meet before taking the martial examination. It would be difficult with just us. It's not about being difficult. We're already late. Even if they arrive tomorrow at that point, it's no different from the mission being disrupted. Didn't we already consider the situation where the advance team wouldn't arrive on time? Let's just head back. At Okagi's words, Ganyang sighed. No matter how he thought about it, it was unreasonable. Due to the heavy rain, the rivers had overflowed and they probably couldn't even cross for several days. In fact, the probability of them reaching this place in 3 days, let alone tomorrow, was slim. Phew. All right. You're right. Let's withdraw now. At Ganyang's decision, Okagi finally showed a satisfied expression. From the beginning, he hadn't been too keen on the rear unit coming. The ministry had said they would dispatch capable recruits as requested by that place, but they were nothing more than rookies who lacked real combat experience or even assassination experience. On the other hand, they had been trained for this day. They were waiting for the day they could make a significant contribution and return to the society in glory. But to carry out the mission with those rookies as the main force? No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't accept it. I'll show them that we can do it well enough without those bastards. With that thought, Okagi removed the remaining deer meat from the wooden stand and was about to extinguish the bonfire. Right then, Russell. The presence of someone was felt from the bushes to the southwest. At this, everyone, including him, hurriedly reached for their weapons and turned their heads. Then someone emerged from the bushes, revealing their appearance. It seems we arrived on time. Seeing the face illuminated by the bonfire, Okagi couldn't help but exclaim inwardly. That was because he was momentarily surprised by the beautiful face that seemed like a woman's. Then 3 more people appeared behind him. The one who particularly stood out was a man with a muscular and sturdy physique, though not very tall, wearing a broken rosary around his neck and having a fierce impression. On either side of him were a man in his late 20s who appeared to be holding a somewhat light sword, and a youth with a tall and handsome appearance but giving off a cold feeling. Could it be? At their appearance, Okagi's expression stiffened. Could these people be the rear unit? No way. No matter how much they hurried, it was difficult for the rear unit to meet the deadline. In the first place, they couldn't even cross the river, so how could they arrive today? At that moment of bewilderment, the leader of the advance team, Ganyang, said to them, "Heavenly mandate." This was a prearranged code phrase. At Ganyang's words, Mong Muyak stepped forward and replied, "Earthly fate." At those words, Ganyang's expression brightened. That was because the rear unit, which he thought wouldn't arrive on time, had arrived at the point when they were about to withdraw. Clap. Ganyang clasped his hands together in a polite bow and was about to greet them. "Welcome. The leader of the advance team gone." Then Okagi interrupted. "It's not certain yet if they are the rear unit or not." "What are you talking about? How can those who know this location and the code phrase? What if something goes wrong because of that? We need to be sure of everything." Ganyang couldn't hide his embarrassment at Okagi's firm attitude. He had been filled with dissatisfaction ever since receiving the notification from the society about the rear unit. "Listen, Okagi. The society informed us of 3 people. But they are 4. Moreover, they even met the deadline that was impossible to meet. Doesn't this seem strange at all?" "He has a point." At those words, a hint of wariness appeared on Ganyang's expression. It was indeed strange to dismiss it as just dissatisfaction with the rear unit. Then Okagi drew his sword, aimed it at the rear unit and said, "We were told by the society that the rear unit consists of 3 people. What is your identity?" Mong Muyak, who became upset by his attitude of interrogating while even pointing a sword at them, stepped forward. "Who are you suspecting now? If you've done something suspicious, you should explain it. Are you arguing about it now?" In a normal situation, even if the other party acted sharply, he would have first clarified the circumstances. However, like all members of the rear unit, Mong Muyak was currently in a very sensitive state. In order to meet the deadline, they had arrived here after enduring heavy rain for nearly 10 days without even getting proper rest. But being confronted with such a tone, he couldn't help but feel irritated. Argue? Who? Please calm down. Mok Jae-un stopped him. But my lord. My lord. At the word my lord, Og-ai and the entire advance team frowned. Of course, without minding this, Mok Jae-un said, "The three of us came as the rear unit, and this person is my servant." What? Servant? At Mok Jae-un's words, the exiled monk Jajimjong made a dumbfounded expression. He had intended to watch and see how to handle the situation if a problem arose, but he never thought he would be introduced in such a way. Og-ai, who couldn't hide his displeasure, looked at Jajimjong and snorted. "You brought a servant on a secret mission? Do you expect us to believe that now? He's not someone I brought from the society, but a servant I acquired along the way." At Mok Jae-un's nonchalant reply, OKGI's expression hardened fiercely. He had asked for an explanation, but Mok Jae-un was only spouting nonsense. Even Ganyong, the leader of the advance team, found this unacceptable and half drew the sword at his waist. "Does this situation seem like a joke to you? Do you think we'll just let it slide if you say you brought an unknown servant on an important secret mission given by the society? Is it because of this person's identity? No, that's not the point. Have you heard of Jajimjong by any chance? Whether it's Jajimjong or whoever." What? Ganyong's expression, which had been about to raise his voice thinking the conversation wasn't going anywhere, suddenly stiffened. For a moment he doubted his ears. The Jajimjong he knew was an exiled monk of Shaolin and was more notorious as one of the three madmen in the martial arts world than by his nickname, the demon-subduing Fist Master. Impossible. There was no way. How could the crazy exiled monk that even Shaolin had expelled become this person's servant? No matter how he thought about it, it didn't make sense. However, Ganyong's gaze turned towards Jajimjong. From the moment he first saw him, he thought he had seen that appearance somewhere before. The broken rosary, sturdy physique and fierce impression were all exactly as he had heard in the rumors. Although the situation didn't make sense, the thought that it might be true left Ganyong at a loss for words. But OKGI was different. Do you think we'll believe such nonsense? Even if Shaolin expelled him, do you think the Jajimjong, notorious as one of the three madmen, would become a servant to a greenhorn who hasn't even reached his prime? If you have common sense, such words. Grab. Before he could even finish speaking, someone grabbed OKGI's neck like lightning and lifted him up. It was none other than the exiled monk Jajimjong. This bastard, Og-ai, who thought he had let his guard down for a moment, tried to use the sword he was holding to slash Jajimjong's arm. But before he could do that, Jajimjong twisted his wrist. Crack. Cook. Clang. As a result, he dropped the sword. Regardless, Jajimjong, with veins bulging on his forehead, panted and said, "Whether someone becomes a servant or a slave, who the hell are you to run your mouth? Should I break your neck right here and send you to Buddha's side?" OKGI's pupils shook as if an earthquake had hit. It's really Jajimjong? OKGI's martial arts had reached the pinnacle of perfection. He prided himself on being ranked relatively high among his peers in the righteous faction. However, if someone possessed the strength to grab his neck with one hand, lift him up and render him immobile, it had to be Jajimjong. In the midst of this, Mok Jae-un said to Ganyong, the leader of the advance team, with a smile, "If the number of people has to be exact, why don't we reduce it by one person on this occasion?" Hearing those words, OKGI's face instantly turned pale.